We're 20 days away from the promised land. We've been tackling this for a few years. We went through Leviticus, we've gone through Exodus, and now we're 20 days away from the promised land. Can you see it? Can you taste it? The excitement? We've been sitting in the hot desert for a year, and the time has come to pack up and go. But first, one of the questions I get regularly is, how did I train to present the Bible the way I present it? Okay, believe it or not, in the classroom here, it doesn't matter, overseas, I get asked the same question. In seminary, we study something called hermeneutics, which is a technical term for how to study the Bible. Okay, so we learn about grammar. So we take Greek and Hebrew and all that stuff that I know you're all jealous over that. Okay, we study history, we study backgrounds, we look at all of that stuff. And in seminary, what they do is they give you a tool bag and they start putting tools in it. Okay, just because you have a tool bag doesn't mean you know how to build a house. I've learned from some of our builders, I have no idea how to build a house. I haven't the faintest idea how these things fit together. These buildings, all I know is I hope they're safe. And so you have a tool bag. Then you come out and you enter ministry. You know, when the seminary model first came out, the model back then was you went and you studied, and they filled your tool bag with tools, and then you went and studied under a senior pastor for about a decade. And during that process, you learned what it meant to marry people, to say goodbye and bury people, to visit hospitals, do that sort of thing. And you learned what it means to be a pastor, how to care for people. Okay. Then somewhere along the way, you may get licensed, depending on your denomination. Then after 8-10 years, you get ordained. And then you move into ministry as a senior pastor somewhere. Or if you go on for doctoral studies, you go on into the academy, you begin to teach. They don't really do that anymore. And we're seeing the price of that today. Most of you probably don't follow this. I do. We have 2 to 4 pastors falling every single week now for sexual sin. Okay, 2 years it's been going on, and that's part of the discussion at the scholarship levels. We're putting pastors in place too soon, before they have a chance to really learn what it means to engage in the spiritual warfare. I think about what I wake up at nighttime thinking about. What I wake up thinking about at nighttime tells me what's important to me. And I told the elders, I wake up sometimes thinking about those of you that your marriages are close to the rocks. Some of you I know, others I don't. I wake up thinking about the spiritual warfare for our staff and our elders. Because the moment they join staff, they have this big target right here. If Satan could bring down a church, the fastest way to do it is to come after one of us. And those are the things I think about. And this sounds really crass, and I don't mean it that way, but I don't ever wake up thinking about what you think about me. I don't worry about that. And that's one of the things that come with years of teaching and study. So we learn the mechanics, but that doesn't mean we know how to build a house. Okay? You have to learn that. I cut my teeth overseas in Germany, in the ministry there for 4 years. And I began to learn that, I didn't really know the first thing about faith. I could tell you all the words in the New Testament. I could tell you the history of the Greek word and related to faith or words. But when I got there, I took over on Friday. The guy handed me a checkbook. We signed over at the bank. We had 10 marks in the bank account, and handed me a packet of bills. On Monday, we owed 8,000 marks, and there was no money. So I got there on Friday. On Monday, I had 8,000 marks I had to pay. That's when I learned I don't really know what faith is. That's when I learned. And so I cut my teeth in ministry by starting to figure out how to take these tools in this tool bag and apply it. How to really decide consciously that I want to become a minister. I want to live faithfully. Nancy has been essential, is not even the right word, bigger than that, in helping me learn how to do that. So now, all these decades later, I have a lot of experience. So what happens is when you learn to build a house, you begin to look at things a little differently. I asked Brett Confer one time, he's an architect, one of our elders, when you look at this beautiful building, do you see how beautiful it is, or do you see all the flaws? He said, that's the curse of being an architect. That's the curse of having a PhD. I walk in and see the flaws in the way we think. So one of the things that we've learned over the years is a whole nother level of hermeneutics that's developing called theological hermeneutics. Today we're going to talk about another boring passage. Okay, number the Levites. You get to carry a pole. You get to carry this big vinyl tapestry. You get to carry part of the altar, but only if we cover it in blue so you don't die. You get to carry the ropes that we tie down with. Is that what these two chapters are about? Well, on the surface, yes. And so when you read it, you go, oh, okay, let's get through this. But when, just like last week, when you start digging down underneath it, you start to learn foundational principles about the blueprint of the new covenant that we have today. You get to see things about God that, if you're not careful, you just skim right over it and you miss it. And they're wonderful. But let me take you through an exercise I do in the classroom. Look out the window. What do you see? Now, in the classroom, it doesn't matter if you're bachelor's, master's, or doctoral students. They're all idiots. Okay? We all are. Let's be honest. Mark used to say we're all knuckleheads. For those of you remember Mark. What do you see? You see mountains, right? Beautiful, right? You see white. You see trees out there. You see, if you're standing up, you see cars, light poles, buildings over there. You see a blue sky. So that's what we see. So then I want you to think like a theologian. Tell me what you see. Generally speaking, the younger my students are, the faster they get it. Just as a general rule, my 18-year-olds, when I used to teach, it didn't take them long. See, what you see is, you see an infinite number of shades of blue out there, don't you? Look at all the different colors of green. The buildings, what do they tell you about intelligent design? Right? You see creativity. You see incredible things in creation that teach us about God. Right? All of you, especially those of you that live up here, don't you just love to look at it? People ask me if I ever get tired of seeing it. No, I don't. I don't. But it's the same as when I go to Delray Beach, Florida, where I grew up. I never get tired of looking at the ocean either. And seeing things. I love cruises. I love sitting on my balcony, just looking at the water. I just love it. The clouds are never the same. So if you learn to think theologically and observe everything that lens, then you begin to see something that most people don't see. How beautiful and creative and wonderful God really is. Scriptures are no different. I start with the premise, wherever I am, that this is God's Word. And if I can understand it, it's going to bring life. The most boring passages. Now, I've been studying it for over 4 decades. I'm just now getting to Numbers. Okay? I've read it many times, but this is the first time I've really started to work my way through it. And I am astonished at what I've never seen before. So today we're going to look at the Levites. We're going to look at this chapter and see I'm just going to highlight 2 or 3 points that are fabulous about what God has done. So we're 20 days away until we leave for the Promised Land. He's finishing up what he started in Leviticus. He's laying down just a few more guidelines, a few more, procedures or policies or maybe things he wants them to do. He's now creating this community. He's bringing them all together. He's given them the Levitical code. We've been sitting in the sand for a year. It's kind of hot. Snakes and scorpions everywhere. We have to rely on the Lord to give us food and drink. And now we're ready to go. What's it going to be like? We can't wait to get there. Okay? So I want to give you a picture in your mind as we work through these details. There's a lot of minutia. I'm not going to go through it all. Just pieces of it. Picture you get into the Promised Land. And you're all different tribes. and you all scatter out into the land. Okay? You get your farm. God says you don't have to worry about the houses. I already have them built for you. You don't have to worry about your crops. They're already planted by the enemies that you're going to overcome. You don't have to worry about your flocks. They're there waiting for you. I want you to go into the land, and I want you to relax. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. In other words, everything you could possibly want is there. There's waterfalls. There's flowing rivers. It's all there. And you all get to spread out. And I get to tell you, God says, which plot you get. But you all get one. And you get to keep it. That's in Leviticus. If you're stupid enough to get yourself in financial trouble and you have to sell your land at the end of 50 years, you get it back. So it stays in your family. It's yours. It's your land. This is the beginning, by the way, of good environmental policy. You own a piece of property. Anybody in here ever rent a car? Let me see your hands. Do you ever change the oil when you take it back? You stop and wash it? Why? It's not yours. So in Genesis 3, God says, take care of the earth. I'm going to give each of you a plot because I know you'll take care of your own property. Can you see the dream that he's laid out in front of them? It's a spectacular dream. But you still have to answer the question of who's going to help guide you in your relationship with this God that you just met in the last year. And that's one of the functions of the Levites. So let's get into it. We looked in Numbers 147, chapter 1, verse 47. They just finished the census. Verse 47, the ancestral tribe of the Levites, however, was not counted along with Israel. They're not counted. Down in 53, the Levites, however, are to set up their tents around the tabernacle so that my wrath will not fall on the Israelite community. So, they're not counted, and we're about to find out why. Okay? Because they have something different than the rest of the nation. So, picture the member of the tabernacle, that's God's house. They hadn't learned about omnipresence. They haven't learned that God is everywhere. They don't know that. That's not part of the ancient thinking. God is here. He has his tent almost next to all your tents. I found out I'm a third Ashkenazi Jewish from the priestly line. I have a bunch of second cousins with the name Cohen. They've all been emailing me, how did you get in our family line? I did the DNA test. I have no idea because there's nothing in my family that's Jewish. Now I know there is. We just don't know where. Some are up the line a little bit hanky-panky. My family's English and German. Howard, of course, English and German. Not so. We have our suspicions now because our siblings have all been doing research. So, you're all scattered around the tent. And God is in the middle. And you're already there. You're already living there. And you get to see Moses every day walk over to the tent and have a conversation with God in his own language as a friend talks to a friend face to face. Okay? That's the world that you're living in. So, they were not to be counted. Their role, chapter 1, verse 50, their role, instead, appoint the Levites to be in charge of the tabernacle and all its furnishings, on and on and on. They're in charge of the tabernacle. So now when we get into chapter 3 and 4, it's all the details. You get to carry the pole, you get to carry the fabric, you get to carry the lampstand, you get to carry, and you have to treat things a certain way. The more inside the tabernacle you get, the more you have to be careful. Nobody can walk into the Holy of Holies. Except one person once a year. Because that's God's room. You see, the tabernacle, I talked on the temples and tabernacles, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago at the amphitheater, did a series there. The tabernacle is set up like a living room. It's like God's house. You walk into the outer part of the tabernacle, but you have to go through the priest to get there, or you die. In other words, we're inviting you into the living room. Okay? Then you can go into the holy place. Only certain people can go there. But you can't go into his bedroom, the Holy of Holies. And so they have a God who has said, I love you. I'm going to put my tent right in the middle of all of yours. Okay? He's teaching them respect. He's teaching them boundaries. He's moving them away from the cosmologies or the beliefs of the ancient nations. He's doing that. He's going to do that here too. Okay, so they're supposed to take care of the tabernacle. Now, to make sense of these next two chapters, let me remind you, Levi was the third son of Jacob, okay? And he had 4 children, Gershon, Kohath, Merari, and Jochebed. She was a daughter. She's the mother of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Okay? So he chose the daughters' descendants to be the priests. We shouldn't skip over that too quickly here. It shows you something about the value of women already in God's perspective, that the daughters, the children, the offspring of the daughter of Levi becomes the priestly tribe. But then he has Moses and Aaron. He chose Aaron specifically to be the priesthood, to represent the priesthood. Okay? So then I just read around the tabernacle, you have the 12 tribes, but then you have the Levites. They serve as a barrier right here. Okay? And I'm not going to read all the words of these chapters. You can read them. But I want you to capture the picture that's being painted. You see, Gershon was on the west side. The tabernacle and the temple were always set up in the same orientation. Okay? It's really interesting. In Germany, there is one Jewish what do you call it when people die and they bury them there? Cemetery. There's one Jewish cemetery. Yeah, right. I'm telling you, I think I'm getting dementia or something. There's one Jewish cemetery left because in World War II, the Nazis destroyed everyone but one. And that's only because Goebbels had visited it, and the Jewish, the caretaker, he actually wasn't Jewish, he said, you can't tear this when the bulldozer showed up. Goebbels is here. This is a historical site. There's one. All of the, it's interesting when you walk through it, all of the tombstones are all lined up facing the same direction. And a rabbi, not 100 years ago, whatever, went and took his compass. They're all facing Jerusalem. They're not. They made a mistake with the first few. So there's a section where they're all turned, the newer ones. Okay? The temple was set up that way. It faces the east. The tabernacle was facing the east. So you go to Israel today, you look at the Temple Mount facing east. So on the north side was Gershon, on the south side was Kohath, on the north side was Merari, and then Aaron and Moses were on the east side. Now you think, so what? What a big deal. Does that matter today? Well, it actually does, because it's giving you a theological point. When in Scripture, when you see people moving to the east, that becomes a picture of moving away from God. So, Garden of Eden, where did they place the angels when they kicked them out? On the east side. Tower of Babel, when he got them together, where did they start traveling? To the east. So the east is portrayed throughout the Old Testament as moving away from God. So therefore, the east side of the temple, you're moving to the west to come into the temple or the tabernacle. You're moving toward God. You follow that? Okay, it's a little detail, just a little tiny detail. And who is stationed right there? Aaron, the priest. All the sons of Aaron are right there. The other uncles are all around, but it's the priestly tribe right here. It's not a barrier. It's an invitation to come to God. Just do it the right way. Follow that? Now, for those of you that have heard my teaching long enough to know that we fulfilled that covenant, we're the priests today. I titled the sermon, Come and See. Because that's what happened with Nathaniel and Philip with Jesus. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Come and see. So even the whole layout was designed to begin to teach this incredible lesson of God's desires. Solomon later on in 1 Kings 8 prays, and when the foreigner comes because they've heard of your great name, for they will indeed hear of your great name. I love that. Listen to their prayers and bless them. Answer them so that they will know that you're the one true God. You see, this temple that eventually is going to be built to replace the tabernacle is in some ways similar to all the ancient temples of that part of the world, but there's some vast differences. It's an invitation into a relationship. Everything God is doing is an invitation. When we read it, if we're not careful, it looks like he's saying, you're not welcome, stay out. Be careful, judgment. But everything he's doing is an invitation. But he's very serious about it being done a certain way. Okay? So when you just read the chapters, these 3 and 4, you get lots of details. Who's going to carry which pole? You get all that. But there's something more beautiful underneath it. So then in chapter 3, he wants them to take a census of all the Levites to be redeemed. Okay? Look at Exodus. Exodus 13. Let me go back, because this sets the stage for what's about to happen. Because when you start counting the Levites, what you find out is that the number of the Levites is different than the number of the rest of Israel firstborn, and he's concerned about the little difference. There's 22,000 Levites, and there's 22,273 Israelite firstborn, and God's concerned about the 273. Really? Why? Who cares about the 273? Can't we just round up? Okay, we looked at this last year, Numbers 13, Exodus 13, verse 13. They've come out, they've celebrated the Passover. Okay, now they're supposed to consecrate the firstborn. Redeem every firstborn among your sons. Earlier in this, he said you got to redeem every animal, firstborn of every animal, offer it to the Lord, because the Lord takes credit for all the firstborn. They're his, they belong to him. So then he says, redeem every firstborn among your sons. In the days to come, when your son asks you, what does this mean? Say to him, with a mighty hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. When Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed the firstborn of both people and animals in Egypt. This is why I sacrifice to the Lord the first male offspring of every womb and redeem each of my firstborn sons. Okay, so from then on, every firstborn had to be redeemed, ransomed. Okay, what that means is dedicated. By the way, did you know that the Asian nations still do these kinds of things? One of my interpreters in Kathmandu, in fact, I'll be there in 3 weeks, he was raised, his father was a Buddhist monk. So the second son of a Buddhist monk is dedicated to the temple. And in return for that, the family is given land to live on, house to live in. So he was dedicated to the Buddhist temple. He became a Buddhist monk. And then he found Christ. So he left his position as a Buddhist monk, and they took the household away from his family, his parents. So now they hate Christianity. Okay? These things still happen. So the firstborn is dedicated. That might help you understand Mary and Joseph taking Jesus to the temple, offering a sacrifice. You dedicate the firstborn to the Lord because he said, all the firstborn are mine. They belong to me. That's how he starts to perpetuate, this is the goal, to perpetuate the truth. Because I have a son, and I pass on to him and dedicate him to the Lord. And then he becomes the Lord's from then on. He has a son, and he does the same. Okay? So that's kind of the background. So God says, all right, all the firstborn in Israel are now mine. That's what he said in Exodus. So now we're just a few months after that, and he changes it just a little bit. He said, tell you what I'm going to do. Instead of all your firstborn belonging to me, I'm going to take the Levites as a substitute for the rest of you. You all get out in the land and enjoy the farm. Enjoy your crops. Okay? I'll take care of you. Don't worry. You don't have to worry. When I call you back to the temple 3 times a year for the festivals, I'll watch out for your flocks. I'll watch out for all that. Don't you worry. So the Levites will be a substitute for you because they are the priests. Now you remember the original covenant. Exodus, if you obey me, I'll make you all the kingdom of priests. You just don't know how to do it. So I chose Aaron's sons to be priests that I'm going to scatter among you as a model for what it means to be a priest. And I'm going to give you a mental picture by putting them around the tabernacle. That way you don't accidentally do something you're not supposed to. Walk in and die. Okay? They're going to show you what it means to be priests so that you can become priests. The caveat is that you have to obey the Lord. It's called faithfulness. So you see, he's creating this mental picture. Then all the way through, excuse me. So all the way through, he finds out that there's 22,273, Numbers 3:39. Okay? There's 22,273, verse 43, of the firstborn in Israel, and there's only 22,000 Levites. We got 273 left over that aren't accounted for, haven't been substituted for. Now you think, really? Is that big of a number? And God says, yeah, it actually is. So, in the next verse, he says, the 273, we have to redeem them by giving money, 5 shekels. That's 6 months' salary. You have to give to the priests, and they can use it in the temple treasury from then on. Okay? So all 22,273 are now accounted for. God is a God of, is he a God of details? Yes, he is. And why is that important? Because he knows you, Katie. He knows you. Dana, he knows you. By name. Chris, he knows you by name. Remember what he said to Moses? He said, I will do what you've asked because I am pleased with you and I know you by name. Mike, he knows you by name. These details are important because they're telling us how important every single person is on this journey. Kathy, he knows you by name. He's pleased with you. Isn't that what? Rob, he knows you by name. Isn't that great? Bill, Alicia, he knows you by name. Liz, he knows you by name. And these little details here, if you just skip them over quickly, you lose that sight of that he's concerned about every single one. So now the priests, they have been dedicated on behalf of the nation. You know where this is heading. We're priests. When we turn to Jesus, we become dedicated on behalf of all of our friends, consecrated. We're priests. That's what that means. Then when it gets into the minor details, the points of, you get to carry this pole, you get to carry this piece of fabric, you get to carry that, what you begin to learn is that every single person is important. And guess what? You all have a role to play. In 1 Corinthians, I just put that out there, 1 Corinthians 12. The beginning of 12, 13, and 14 is all about spiritual gifts. There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in everyone, it's the same God who's at work. And he goes on to talk about that the Spirit distributes gifts just as he wants. I've asked the question many times. Who's the most important person in the church? Me, because I have the fun pleasure of standing up teaching you, or you because you're the army of God out there doing all the work? My job is to equip you. This is the army right here. I'm not the army, you are. I'm just a little tiny piece of it. Right here. And that's no different than you get to carry a pole. You get to carry a piece of fabric. You get to have part of the altar. You get to do this. That's what he's saying, is that every person in the priesthood has a role to play in taking care of the tabernacle. So these details are important because they're not because of the pole, but because we have to think theologically of what God is doing. He's laying the foundation here for the new covenant for us today. Because you know what? We are that tabernacle. We're the temple. God dwells through us. And every one of us is important to God. Doesn't matter if you're part of the 22,000 or the 273. We stand equal before the Lord. Everyone, and each of us has some role to play. That's what these chapters teach us. It's laying the groundwork for what's about to happen under the new covenant. You see, Peter in 1 Peter, he quotes in 1 Peter chapter 2, we are those who are dedicated, redeemed, whatever word you want to use. But you are, this is a quote from Exodus 19. Back up just a few months, they were standing in the desert, and Moses said when they met God for the first time, this is what God said, if you obey me, I will make you a chosen people out of all the nation. You'll be my prized possession, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, to show the world how good I am. That's what God says to the Israelites. So now Peter in 1 Peter 2, he quotes that. But you are now a chosen people. Okay, what happened between if you obey me, I'll make you this, and you are this? What happened between those? What's the answer in Sunday school? Jesus. Okay? Jesus. And now we are the fulfillment of that initial covenant, that promise. And Numbers is all about God's care for his people and his fulfillment of the covenant. You, DCC, you are a chosen people. You are a royal priesthood. You are a holy nation. You have been dedicated on behalf of the Lord to represent him. Ephesians 3, to God be the glory in the church. That's us, folks. So you are a royal priesthood. You're a holy nation. You are God's special possession. Why? Because you're more important? No. So that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. You see, we went through the Exodus just like the Israelite people did. Spiritual Exodus. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. So, as the nation spreads out, the Levites become a model of what all the rest of the nation was supposed to become, priests. They surround the tabernacle. Aaron himself and his sons are on the east side. The only way into the tabernacle was through the priesthood. Don't mess up. Come and see. What did Nathanael say? John chapter 1. I love it. Philip found Nathanael and told him, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth? Nathanael asked. What did Philip say? Come and see. All these details are important because this little group of priests, 22,273, that's their job. Come and see. Come and see. Let me walk with you into the tabernacle. Do you realize when you walk up to your friend and you put your arms around them and you just give them a hug, do you realize they're standing inside the temple? Because you're the spiritual temple. Remember Moses in the desert, he sees a burning bush and he walks over. God says, take your sandals off. You're standing on holy ground. Why is this dirt holy, but this dirt not? Because that's God's presence. You're the temple of the Holy Spirit. Every one of you has the Spirit of God. You know what that means? The ground that you stand on, the ground you're sitting on, it's holy. When you walk up to your friend and you love them, they're standing inside the temple at that second. It all goes back to this right here. What we do makes a difference. What we do is important. The way we live our lives is critical. Every little detail is important, and every one of you has a job to play. Why? So that when the nations saw this tabernacle and eventually the temple, what was the message that was being sent out? Come and see. Come and see. That's our job. We're all priests before the Lord. Come and see. Father, thank you for giving us that incredible role. Thanks for giving us each a function to play in the church, Lord. I know I'm the one up here with a microphone, and but I look out and I see an army of priests. Even the metaphors don't really fit together. An army of priests. I see a whole group here, Lord, that army, because they're fighting the spiritual battle on behalf of our friends and neighbors, and priests because they're inviting, come and see. Come and see. Or as David said, taste and see that the Lord is good. Father, I pray that you would continue to use us. And in the meantime, Lord, for the people here, sitting here, help them to see how important they are. They're so important. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.